we're going to be visiting some island communities. As a reminder, Jews have actually been living on islands and setting up synagogues on islands for a very long time. In fact, I think we saw our very first session back in October. I can pull up, let me see if I can pull up the picture very quickly. But the oldest synagogue ruins anywhere in the world, actually, including Israel, is actually the Delos Synagogue, which is in the islands of Santorini. This is the Wikipedia page, but we'll pull up a quick picture of the synagogue ruins. This is actually the oldest synagogue ruins, dating back to the year 150 before the Common Era. This is from before the story of Hanukkah. Now that's not. We'll look at those later. But this is the synagogue at Delos, Greece. It dates back 2,150 years. And so Jews have actually been living on islands, we know, for a very long time. Before we get to the Caribbean, I want to share actually another community here, the Jewish community in Malta. I don't know if anyone has been to Malta, island south of Italy in the Mediterranean, but the Jewish community in Malta has roughly about 500 people today, but is one of the oldest continuous Jewish communities in the world. Take a look here. Sometimes this site doesn't work that well, but just share a little, as you can read, that there's evidence in Malta that Phoenician mariners 3,500 years ago came, and there's evidence that there were Jews from the tribes of Zvulun and Asher that actually traveled with them that made their way to Malta already 3,500 years ago. And so the Jewish community has existed. There have been Jews dating back that long. And right here, you can read the Middle Ages, the Jewish community had grown to about 250 people. And the synagogue was destroyed in the 1990s, the synagogue there, but a new synagogue was built, or really they turned a condominium into use as a synagogue. And so you can look up here. Sometimes this freezes, but this is the makeshift. This is now the synagogue space in Malta, built in 2002. Is a Sephardi congregation. I'm going to take it away because it's shaky a little, but there have been Jews on islands, as we can see, and traveling to various islands for a very long time. And the Caribbean is actually no exception. Primarily Jews fleeing, Jews who had left Spain during the Spanish expulsion, Inquisition, had gone to Amsterdam and other places, were among the first Jews to make their way to the Caribbean. I know we saw a couple of weeks ago the first community that was built in Recife, Brazil, but many came to the Caribbean. We actually know that because we visited a number of weeks ago the oldest continuously inhabited synagogue in the Western Hemisphere, Mikveh Israel in Curacao, and designed with a sand floor, which is a reminder of some of the synagogues in Portugal following the Inquisition and following the expulsion from Portugal, which took place in 1497, just 5 years after the expulsion from Spain. Sand was used to muffle the sound of footsteps of people gathering to pray. And there are only 5 synagogues in the world left with the sand floors to recall that time. 4 of those 5 synagogues are in the Caribbean, actually. One of them being this oldest continuously used synagogue since the 1630s, I believe, right? And we'll just a little review of the sanctuary here, designed based on the Portuguese synagogue in Amsterdam, but utilizing the sand floor.
That's not St. Thomas, is it? That's one of the Curacao.
No.
This is Curacao. We'll actually visit the synagogue in St. Thomas in just a few minutes. One of the other 4 synagogues with a sand floor is the synagogue in St. Thomas, as well as a synagogue in Kingston, Jamaica, and a synagogue in Suriname. Are 4 of the remaining synagogues with sand floors. There's an example of a sand floor synagogue also at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, that was kind of transported there also from Suriname. But I want to start actually at Nidhe, Israel, in Barbados. Is actually the only historic synagogue in the Caribbean that does not have a sand floor. These are a couple pictures. I'm going to stop the share. I just want to share a little information about it. I don't know if, first of all, has anyone been to Barbados and to the synagogue? Not in the group right now. So the community and this congregation built its first synagogue actually in the 1660s. Unfortunately, the Jewish community in Barbados has more or less died out. There are not that many Jews left in Barbados. This current building that I just shared the picture of is from 1833. But Jews were coming, right? This was a Sephardi community, as many of the communities in the Caribbean were. It's the oldest communities. They chose in their building to incorporate features from different congregations around the world. There were 6 brass pineapples crowning the Amud, the Teva, which is a symbol that they brought from Charleston, South Carolina. And the clock in the synagogue was designed to be a copy of the synagogue at London's Bevis Marks Synagogue, which we visited earlier. And they were looking for different ways to pay tribute to synagogues around the world. So this synagogue was designated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site and was rebuilt, I mentioned, in 1833, following the destruction of the previous building by a hurricane in 1831. The original Jews actually came to Barbados from Recife, Brazil. 300 Jews that were being persecuted by the Portuguese, as Brazil still was a Portuguese colony, and came to Barbados, where the sugar industry was really starting to boom, and they brought the sugar industry with them, and really led to a boom there. They introduced sugarcane crop to Barbados, and Barbados quickly became one of the world's leaders and major sugar producers at the time. So Barbados is also a home to one of these very old, one of the first Jewish communities in the Western Hemisphere. We'll move along. I want to share a unique story before we get to some of the other older synagogues. Sosua, Dominican Republic. If anyone is familiar with the story of Sosua in the Dominican Republic, some of you may be aware that in the Evian conference, during the Nazi regime in Germany, a conference right before the outset of what we see as kind of the war of the Holocaust in 1939, there was a conference of world nations to determine who might take in Jewish refugees from Germany. And really no country, none of the major powers were willing to take in any more refugees than their previous laws allowed for. The Dominican Republic, surprisingly, although a very small country, was really the only country that was willing to take in larger numbers of Jews. Although a small country, they did allow for 800 refugees. They allowed for refugees. Only about 800 refugees actually made it to the shores of the Dominican Republic, and most were sent to a small village, really, with almost no one at the time. Today, this community still has under 50,000 people on the northern shores of the Dominican Republic. But many were sent to really this backwater, Sosua, and really built up the village and town. And by the 1980s, this community, until the 1980s, was predominantly a Jewish community. Most of the Jews left Sosua because the community hit on hard times and is not the best area today. And most Jews left Sosua in the Dominican Republic. But the synagogue that they built is still there, and a museum was opened, and there's a strong Jewish legacy of Ashkenazi Jews that were refugees during the Holocaust and right before the Holocaust that made their way to the Dominican Republic and established a community there, and still holds a legacy there. And now there's also a synagogue in Santo Domingo in the capital as well. But wanted to share the unique community the Ashkenazi community of the Dominican Republic and Sosua. So I don't know if anyone has been to the Dominican Republic, maybe to more resort locations that don't have synagogues today, but Dominican Republic, I think the Jewish community owes a gratitude as really being, although a small country, a country that was willing at a time when all major world powers and the major countries in the world were not willing to raise quotas on Jews coming in, open their doors. Of course, it was not so easy for Jews to get to the Dominican Republic, being across the ocean in a small island country, but those who did make it there were given a place to live and were able to build their own Jewish community in the Dominican Republic. We'll come now to a synagogue that I think some of you are familiar with, the St. Thomas Synagogue. I know it's a common stop, St. Thomas, on many cruise lines. And St. Thomas, of course, this is another one of the congregations that uses the sand floor, a Sephardi congregation. Before I share any information about it, I wanted to hear if anyone's been on a cruise or been to St. Thomas, this synagogue, and a visit to St. Thomas. Would love to hear any thoughts from your visit to the congregation.
I've been there.
Do you want to share anything? Yeah, anything you want to share?
It's actually, it's kind of cool thing. Everybody gets off the cruise ship and you follow the crowd. You follow the Jews and you find the synagogue. and that was it. And I ran into Rabbi Rosie from formerly at the temple at the same time. So it's a really cool place. That's all.
I have a input.
Yeah,
Rabbi. Yeah, when we were there, we did the walking thing and we went up there. But on the cruise, there was a person in a wheelchair. And if you're knowing where I'm getting at, there is a big hill. And
it's at the top, near the top of the hill, correct?
Right. Wheelchairs, it's not accessible. And no, they didn't believe it. And they were just going up and up and up and they never made it. But it's really an exceptional thing to see.
Well, they have destination bar mitzvahs there.
Yeah, they do have bar mitzvahs there. Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you. So this in Charlotte Amalie, right, this synagogue is actually, the formal name of the congregation is Bracha v'Shalom v'Gmilut Chasadim, is the full name of the congregation. Kahal Kadosh Bracha v'Shalom v'Gmilut Chasadim. The congregation in St. Thomas was actually founded in 1792, a very old congregation. The synagogue itself was built in 1833, the current standing synagogue. And it is now the synagogue with the longest history of continuous use on what is now United States soil. Declared a National Historic Landmark in 1997.
Chicago.
It's the second oldest synagogue on the United States soil after the Touro Synagogue, although the Touro Synagogue had a period where it wasn't being used as a synagogue. So this now claims the longest synagogue in continuous use as a congregation. But originally, right, Spanish and Portuguese Sephardic Jews came to the Caribbean. Really, a big part of their work in the Caribbean was financing trade between Europe and the New World. The synagogue did sustain some damage in Hurricanes Irma and Maria in 2017, but continued to function. And so this synagogue, right, has become a highlight of cruise ship tours and visits to St. Thomas, since it's within walking distance, right, of you can get to it from the cruise ships. Yeah, Rob.
I have one more thing. When we were there, the rabbi that was there at that time, maybe not anymore, he was from Chicago and he knew Rabbi Schachter. So it was really sort of like at home for him and at home for us. So it was just something that was interesting. And I don't know who's there now, but we thought that was pretty cool.
No, it is. Yeah, no, it is. I'm not sure who's there today. I could look up who's there today, but definitely a site. There are destination B'nai Mitzvah and other groups that come there. Is really a special landmark in St. Thomas. And so if you ever make it to St. Thomas or on a cruise that that visits St. Thomas, certainly worth a visit. And I think, as Lynn said, I think many people make it there. Lynn Danzig said, many people make it there simply by following the crowd. So St. Thomas Synagogue, we're going to move to another island. I don't know if anyone's been to this particular synagogue. We'd love to hear. The Luis de Torres Synagogue in Freeport, Bahamas. I wasn't able to find a picture of the interior, but what most notable about the synagogue is probably the name. So at first, has anyone been to anything Jewish in the Bahamas, I suppose, or been to Freeport, to the synagogue?
I haven't been there yet, but my mother-in-law lived there from when she was 3 until 12 in Nassau.
Oh, in Nassau, good. So that's right. Any other Jews tend to be either in Freeport or in Nassau. But this is the only synagogue building that actually exists in the Bahamas today. Does anyone know who Luis de Torres is? So,
wasn't he one of Columbus's men?
Yes.
And helped
yes.
financing his trip.
Right. So Luis de Torres is identified by Mayor Kayserling's book, Christopher Columbus and the Participation of the Jews in the Spanish and Portuguese Discoveries, as actually a Marrano, as really an undercover, kind of undercover Jew that was forcibly converted during the Spanish Inquisition, but retained his Jewish practice underground, essentially, who sailed with Christopher Columbus and was one of the leading figures, right, who helped finance Christopher Columbus's sails. So he helped support and was part of those journeys. It's believed that, there's, according to this book, and there are many scholars that believe that he was Jewish. Luis de Torres was actually the name that he took on, his Spanish name, but apparently his Jewish name. He was born Yosef ben Halevi HaIvri, is what they believe his Hebrew name was. And so in honor of him, because he made his way, he's believed to be the first Jewish person, or first Jewish person who made his way and set foot on the Bahamas. This synagogue renamed themselves in his honor, in his memory, as the Luis de Torres Synagogue. And not only the first Jew in the Bahamas, but believed to be the first Jew in the New World, essentially, based on his journey with Columbus. And although this wasn't the original name of the congregation, it was renamed to honor Luis de Torres and this story, as he's believed to be the first Marrano Jew to make it to the New World.
Is Puerto Rico on your map?
We'll look. So there is Jewish community. Do you want to share anything? We can actually.
Because I actually
share. Do you want to share
Puerto Rico?
Did you make it to the synagogue in Puerto Rico? Yeah. Do you want to share?
Yeah, sure. I spent 3 weeks there because my cousin had retired to Puerto Rico, and I did go to Friday night services. It's a Reformed congregation, very lovely people, and these are people who are mostly Americanos who have gone there and decided to live there because it was very comfortable and very pleasant until the hurricanes came. But they were very gracious, and they had a Shabbos meal there, and I was invited. So it was really very lovely. And certainly a lot of people from the cruise ships do come for Friday night services there if they're in town over the weekend. And they got a good attendance at the Friday night services. Not so much the Shabbos morning, but the Friday night was big, which it is in most Reformed congregations, I think. And it's a very lovely building. It's very new. I would guess it was built in the 50s, but I'm not sure.
Thank you. So there's actually a couple synagogues in in San Juan, as well as Chabad. And I actually drove by. I was in Puerto Rico, but I wasn't long enough. Wasn't there over Shabbat to be able to go to the synagogue, but we drove by it. But there's two. I don't know if you were at Beth Shalom or at Shaare Tzedek, but I'll show pictures here.
I might remember it if I see the pictures.
So let me.
I don't remember which one.
Rabbi Josh,
Yeah.
I
Mhm.
have a question. I know a woman who was from Puerto Rico. She's now living in the
Mhm.
United States. But her family goes back generations in Puerto Rico. And she told me that there are like 4 or 5 synagogues or congregations, I should say, on the island. I found that really amazing. I did not know, because sometimes just a little family has a congregation, or like when we were in Morocco, and there were like 20 congregations, but they were family run. It was
Right.
grandma and a few kids and cousins. So I didn't know, but she told me that there were like 4 on the island, not all in San Juan. And
Right. No, there are. Yeah. I didn't know the
Yeah.
exact number, but there are. San Juan is the
Yeah.
largest community, but there are others
Yeah.
as well.
She says it's a
No,
very
it's
Probably
interesting.
Ponce.
community.
Don't say yeah.
Yeah. So
No, very interesting. And for much of Puerto Rico's history, because it was not always an American, before it was part of U.S. territory, Spanish territory, Jews were forbidden actually under the Inquisition Act. And actually, officially on the books, Jews were not legally, were actually forbidden from entering Spain on the books until 1991, believe it or not, when they officially revoked the law of Spanish expulsion. There were Jews, it wasn't being enforced, but officially on the books, it wasn't until 1991 that the Spanish expulsion law on the books was actually removed. So there were some Marranos and kind of crypto Jews, conversos, that managed to settle on Puerto Rico as early as the 15th century and 16th century, in the early years following the expulsion from Spain. The first synagogue wasn't established until a few hundred years later. And even after the Spanish-American War in 1898, when Puerto Rico was ceded to the United States, very few American Jews settled, but more started coming in the 1930s and 1940s, refugees fleeing Nazi-occupied Europe. The first Jewish community center was established in 1942. And then, some came, and we'll get to the synagogue in a little while, and the Jewish community in Cuba. But there was an influx of Jewish immigrants in the 1950s after the Cuban Revolution in 1959. The majority of the Jews who were in Cuba left, and some, many came to Miami, but some did go to Puerto Rico as well. And so the synagogue, the first synagogue, was actually the former residence of a leader of a Jewish resident and Jewish family, Shaare Tzedek, built in 1954, and then later Beth Shalom. So Congregation Shaare Tzedek was established as a conservative synagogue, and Beth Shalom a Reform synagogue. So I'll share just a picture first of the conservative synagogue, Shaare Tzedek. This is the Synagogue 360, which for some reason always is a little glitchy, but this is the sanctuary of the conservative congregation in San Juan.
I think it was Beth Shalom that I was at.
You may have gone to Beth Shalom. This is more traditional. Ashkenazi,
Yeah.
1953. And then I just pulled a picture. Yeah, let me.
Just before you switch over, do those walls open for overflow if they get it? Or are those solid walls?
Good question. And I wasn't, it actually looks like they do open, but
It looks
just
like
at the picture,
panels.
but I haven't been there to know, yeah. But here we can see a little information about this particular synagogue and some of the pictures of the synagogue, a beautiful synagogue here in San Juan. If anyone wants to read, but right, the membership really increased as refugees came from Cuba to Puerto Rico. And the largest synagogue today in in Puerto Rico, according to Hebrew. Okay, this is the project of Beit HaTfutzot, the Synagogue 360 program that they have listed. A little about the synagogue, and I'll share here. We'll look for a picture of Beth Shalom Synagogue or it's actually Temple Beth Shalom, Puerto Rico. Maybe this is the synagogue that you were at.
Yes, that's it.
Yeah. So I don't know if they have a picture of the interior here, but this is the exterior of the building, and we'll pull up, if I can pull an image of the chapel right here. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
This looks familiar.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Right. So these are the two primary synagogues. Here's the sanctuary.
Yes.
In San Juan. But there definitely, there are Jewish communities in San Juan, and was great to see. There's also, I remember even just passing when I was in San Juan, a memorial that was right in a central location in San Juan, a memorial to victims of the Holocaust, which was nice to see, very centrally located in San Juan, for people driving by on a major highway street.
Yeah, the Beth Shalom is also fairly close to a number of the beachfront hotels there. So they get a lot of people who come from the hotels.
Right. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I shared the wrong thing and not the original. PowerPoint, but definitely worth visiting if you make your way to Puerto Rico. There's a vibrant Jewish community that's there today, and with the conservative traditional synagogue, a Reform synagogue, and a Chabad, all in San Juan. And thank you for mentioning that there are to Sandy, that there are Jewish communities not only in San Juan, but in other areas in Puerto Rico as well.
I was even able to buy kosher meat in the supermarket.
Oh, good. So we mentioned that Jews came from Havana, from Cuba, where Cuba had a strong Jewish community. In 1959, the vast majority of the Jews actually left Cuba. There's about 1,000 Jews in Cuba today, 1,500 Jews, mostly centered in Havana. This is Temple Beth Shalom. This is kind of the main synagogue. There are a couple other synagogues in Havana. And just share a little inside, and then we'll learn a little about the Jewish community in Havana. But wanted to share, has anyone been to Havana or to Cuba? I know it may not have been possible for a long time, but in recent years, it's now possible to visit. I'm wondering if anyone has visited Cuba or the Jewish community in Cuba.
Just over a year ago, right before the lockdown, my parents were on a Jewish tour of Cuba, or tour of Jewish Cuba, I guess. So they were in Havana and 2 other cities, and brought back amazing stories and pictures.
Wow, great.
But the community really relies on help from tourists.
Yeah, so the community, the people that stayed following 1959 really were the people that had less money, or maybe some that, I'm gonna need to fix these. That website is having some issues, but I'll see if we can get it to work in just a minute. But the Jewish community, unfortunately, does not have a lot of money today. It's a fairly impoverished community, and those were mostly the people that stayed, unfortunately, were those who didn't have the means to leave. So this particular synagogue, Temple Beth Shalom, was built in 1952. In 1981, they sold much of the building to the state. So now it has a lot of other things that run there. It's a cultural center, but part of the building, it remains in Jewish hands, and is where there's the primary synagogue. Repairs to the building were made in the 1990s to really rebuild the synagogue structure. And the community has enjoyed some security, and there hasn't been so much anti-Semitism. there. Fidel Castro actually attended a Hanukkah celebration near the end of his life at this particular synagogue. But the story of Jews in Cuba is one that dates back also, like much of the Caribbean. Popular lore is that there's 3 Jews that arrived in Cuba shortly after the expulsion from Spain in 1492 that may have traveled with Columbus. Luis de Torres, of course, who went to the Bahamas, they also visited the island of Cuba. But there were Jews that came from Brazil, again, being persecuted under Portuguese control in the 16th and 17th centuries. Jews who came and established trade similar to the other islands in the Caribbean. Of course, many came once Cuba was liberated from Spanish colonial rule in 1898, as of course Spain it was illegal technically for Jews to come. But there were Jews, Ashkenazi Jews that came, Jews that formed the first synagogue in 1906 in Cuba. And so the Cuban Jewish community reached as many as 12,000 Jews in the 1950s prior to the Cuban Revolution, and 15,000 in 1959, until the community shrunk drastically following the revolution. So Cuba now is a place that we can visit, is definitely worth checking out if you make it to Havana, in particular, is where the Jewish community is centered today. A rabbi that I actually grew up, one of my teachers, and a rabbi that I worked with, originally from Chile, but he now lives in the United States, but as a native Spanish speaker, was chosen to lead a number of missions to Cuba in the early 2000s and late 1990s, before there were formal relations, and was able to serve as a visiting rabbi to the community on a number of occasions, and also brought back stories from that time, fascinating stories about the Jewish community trying to make ends meet to support the Jewish community, and the work that he did there. So definitely a unique Jewish community. And thank you, Maddie, a book, An Island Called Home, Returning to Jewish Cuba, and Jewish Pirates of the Caribbean, both great books. Thank you, Nina and Larry.
There's another book that's very interesting that starts out in Cuba, but it starts out with a Catholic family. It's a book by Jeannie Milgram called My 15 Grandmothers. And it's a story of this woman raised Catholic who, when her grandmother dies, she gets her grandmother's treasures. And in it is a mezuzah and several other things. And she goes then on this search to find her Jewish heritage. And she actually fights the Rabbanut in Israel to be declared Jewish. And she winds up going back to Spain and actually finding where her family lives. She discovers where the mikveh was and everything else. So it starts out in what was going on in Cuba in the Fidel Castro days and moves on.
Good, very interesting. No, thank you, very interesting. And just definitely a unique, especially with the unique history that Cuba has and Cuba's relation with the United States, a unique Caribbean community. Want to move to another ancient, or ancient is not the right word, but old Jewish community in the Caribbean that kind of dissipated. Today, there are only 85 Jews there approximately, but the island of Aruba was also one of the very early places that Jews settled in the Caribbean. The Shaare ruins, we think of ruins usually maybe in ancient Israel and in Europe, but ruins of the original synagogue, Chonen Dalim, in Oranjestad, Aruba, is definitely a sight to see. I just will share some more pictures here. This is This is a synagogue ruins. This synagogue was built in the early 1640s or 1650s, and you can visit the ruins today. The synagogue doesn't exist. There is a current synagogue built in 1952 in Oranjestad in Aruba today. But just to see remnants of Jewish life in the Caribbean, also, of course, Sephardi Jews that originally made their way to Aruba. Jews were recorded as early as the 16th century coming to Aruba, but very small numbers, and the Jewish community of that original synagogue dissipated. There also is actually an ancient Jewish cemetery, or old Jewish cemetery in Oranjestad containing 8 gravestones dating all the way back to 1563. But more recently, Jewish settlers started coming in the 1800s. 1837 was when the cemetery started to be used again after those 8 original gravestones that were there. And it became an officially recognized Jewish community by the Dutch only in 1956. The community came to its peak, though, and many left for the United States. So the community today only has about 85 people. And the congregation today is small enough that it's just whoever is there. They kind of blend both Ashkenazi and Sephardic traditions. But there still is a Jewish community in Oranjestad, a very small Jewish community, and would love to hear if there's anyone who's been to the synagogue in Aruba, or been to Aruba, visited, or seen any of the Jewish community there. So like many of the other islands that we visited, Aruba as well. And you know, we don't often think of the Caribbean as a heartland for Jews, but Jews have been living and thriving in some of the Caribbean islands for hundreds of years. Another one of the islands that Jews made it was Jamaica. And we'll see a picture I'll pull up of the synagogue, a beautiful synagogue in Kingston, Jamaica, in the capital. But when the English captured Jamaica from Spain in 1655, there were known to be some Jews, because they were conversos and began to practice Judaism openly. And by 1611, the island of Jamaica had an estimated population of 1,500 people. 75 were described as, quote, foreigners, which likely included some of those Portuguese Jews. So there have been Jews for a very long time in Jamaica. They built their first synagogue actually in 1719. Already was the first synagogue. Today's synagogue dates from the 1800s, Shaare Shalom. And I'll share a picture and just share a little about the congregation. Another one of the 4 congregations that has the sand floor. Here's congregation Shaare Shalom in Kingston, Jamaica, beautiful building. And here's the interior of the sanctuary, 2-floor with a sand floor that still stands in Kingston. I feel, you know, I've been to Jamaica on more of a beach resort, but didn't make my way to Kingston. But a beautiful synagogue still remaining today. A little about the Jewish community at Shaare Shalom. With the influx of Jews in the late 1600s, early 1700s, there actually were 2 synagogues built, a Sephardi synagogue and an Ashkenazi synagogue. There were attempts at mergers which were unsuccessful, but eventually, as the numbers of Jews dwindled, the current building was built after the destruction of the previous building in 1885 by an earthquake. The communities did come together to form a united congregation. The building that I just shared with you was built in 1912, and the communities merged together in that building in 1921. Just a little about the synagogue, right? It was originally built as an Orthodox congregation. Today it's a Reform synagogue, and actually maintains a prep school, the Hillel Academy, with over 800 students. The academy is non-denominational and not directly only for the Jewish community. And so many of the students, the large majority of the students are not Jewish, but still actually runs a school out of the synagogue. Notably, in 2002, Louis Farrakhan, the Nation of Islam leader, actually visited this synagogue in his first visit to a synagogue in an attempt to repair his relationship with the Jewish community, after he was rejected to appear at really any synagogue in the United States, any American synagogue, and any who feared even inviting him would send the wrong signal to the Jewish community. So just an interesting note about this synagogue in Jamaica. But this synagogue the building dates back to 1912, but the congregation's dating back all the way to the early 1700s.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yeah.
When you were talking about the Amazon, you talked about how the small Jewish community intermarried with natives and created this Amazonian group. Did similar things happen in the Caribbean where you had intermarriage with natives and you have dark-skinned Jews that have arisen from that?
Yes, no, it has. I don't think it's happened to the extent of the Amazonian Jews, but there definitely are Caribbean, there definitely has been intermarriage and intermingling and Black Caribbean Jews who have been, Jewish for generations does exist. I'll actually share for those of you who know the Sardones, we need to ask them, but the Sardone family traces, I think it's to Jamaica, if I'm not mistaken, traces their roots, and his grandparents is a Black family in our congregation that traces their roots to the Caribbean. Mm-hmm. As an example, right up in Ashern, but it's definitely true. That definitely does exist. Perhaps not to the extent of the Amazonian community, but there definitely are Caribbean Jews where there's been intermingling of the native population and Jewish immigrants already dating back hundreds of years. So I would love, it would be great if you know Alberto, I'll see if he might be able to come on and share some of his family history.
That would be interesting, sure.
Is from this mingling of the Caribbean communities. Finally, I have one last synagogue, a very unique synagogue in the Caribbean, and then would love to hear if there's any other Jewish stories, but these were just some of the examples of some of the oldest Caribbean communities and more recent Caribbean communities, as well as kind of the unique communities in Cuba and the Dominican Republic. But want to share a very unique synagogue in the Cayman Islands. Brock, is B-R-A-C Brock? Is that the correct Cayman Brock? But we'll share here. Let me share the screen. Oh, sorry, wrong. 1 second. From Jamaica, we're going to go to the Cayman Islands. There's really no community to speak of in the Cayman Islands. In fact, there are a total of 3 observant Jews in this particular island, Cayman Brock. However, we have a synagogue. This is likely the newest synagogue in the Caribbean, built around 10 years ago. And the story is very unique here in this particular synagogue. Cayman Brock, I'll just share the story of this particular congregation. The population is almost exclusively Protestant on the island. And the population is comprised of really a few people, including the couple who built this synagogue with their own hands. Lynn and George Walton, Ashkenazi Jews from Brooklyn. Or she was an Ashkenazi Jew from Brooklyn, and he was from Brock, a Brocker from Cayman Brock. descended from one of the early families with Sephardic roots that was there. They got married and traveled, but eventually they retired after their careers. They retired to the island and opened a bed and breakfast there. But since they retired, they loved the place. He was from there. There was no place for Jewish worship, and the family had become an observant family. And so he actually built a synagogue for his wife in their garden. But they really went all out. The family had means and built this beautiful synagogue, which has pearl granite floors and Italian marble beams. I would love to find, if anyone sees a picture, I couldn't find a picture of the interior. But this was a personal synagogue that was built, and now really a tourist attraction in some ways, but they've opened it up to anyone who wants to visit who happens to be in the Caymans and Cayman Brac. And they have their own services there that they lead almost every Friday night. And they give tours, they delight in giving tours to anyone who wants to come. The synagogue, right less than 20 years old, was built and quite a unique feature in the Caribbean. So just wanted to share that with you. Has a very different story than the other synagogues that we visited. But just wanted to share that particular synagogue with you in the Caymans. So we'll stop there. I wanted to stop for any thoughts, questions, anything that anyone's experienced. But I think it was a great suggestion to visit the Caribbean because the Caribbean is full of Jewish history and not necessarily the first place we would think of when we think about Jewish life, but really Jewish life dating back to when Columbus came and explored the New World. Jews have been coming to the shores of the Caribbean often before many of our own Jewish communities. Before the Jewish community in Cleveland was established, for instance, there were Jewish communities already thriving in the Caribbean. So I want to turn any thoughts or anything to share.
I'm just curious about the Cayman. Besides the people who built the place, how many other Jews besides tourists too? Because in terms of tourists in the pandemic, how many Jews are there?
Right. Well, they're really the only Jewish family from my gathering in this particular island. There really isn't a Jewish community. There's a Jewish family or two. But so it primarily is their own personal worship space and prayer space. But for any visitors, they always welcome people in.
We didn't touch on this, but there's a certain taint on Jews historically as being slave traders. I just heard a whole presentation about the two Jewish families that controlled Shanghai in the 1920s, and they monopolized the opium trade, not unlike the Sacklers with the opiates today. And so there's a little bit of a dark underside to the presence of Jews in certain parts of the world, including the Caribbean.
Thank you. Thank you.
Max Wisnitzer's family went to Curacao, and there were two, and they built the first Ashkenazic synagogue on Curacao. There's a movie called Shtetl in the Caribbean that came out in 2014 that we happened to see at a conference, and very interesting, talking about the religiosity of Curacao, because you have the Sephardic versus the Ashkenazic traditions and how one did not mingle with the other.
No, and that happened in many places, unfortunately still to this day that sometimes happens, where the communities don't always intermingle so well. But no, thank you. I'll need to check that out. And the Wisnitzers, as you may know, I think the family is from Panama originally. The Wisnitzer family name, which we didn't visit, but Panama also has a vibrant Jewish community in Panama City today, and maybe for a future visit.
I think if memory serves me, you showed us a synagogue in Madagascar, which is also a pretty big island.
Yeah, not Madagascar. I'm wondering where it was. Madagascar, I actually did research. I couldn't find. I don't think there was a synagogue.
Maybe
There
we
were
just
some
talked about
Jews.
it.
We talked about Madagascar, and I think you mentioned, because some Jews did make it to Madagascar, fleeing from, or not fleeing, but Madagascar was offered or considered as a location for a Jewish state.
Right.
There was a small number of Jews, but never a synagogue, I don't believe. But we have looked at some other synagogues, different sessions to focus on different things. So we've seen
Right.
synagogues that don't necessarily fit this category and other
Right, and also the
well,
Mediterranean islands.
Yeah.
I think there's a reason why Jews go to islands, and I think one of them is that they seem to be safe when things aren't looking so great. And the mainland, you ship out to an island to get away.
I think it's very true. Yeah.
I have a very dear friend whose family, she grew up in Panama, and the family had a business in Panama. And then they moved to Israel from there.
Good, right. And I have, I don't have family in Panama, but I do have family in Costa Rica, just to the north of Panama, who went for business and trading and did very well there. Some of my family there has since moved to Israel and moved to New York. But I do still have some relatives in San Jose, another Latin American community that are actually thriving. Those small in numbers, Panama, Costa Rica, Guatemala, all have thriving Jewish communities actually. Although small in number, the Jews that have stayed because they've done very well in the respective countries.
Right. Yeah, she lives in New Jersey now. So.
Yeah.
Not an island country, but it'd be interesting to hear about the Jews of Mexico. I know several years
thank
ago,
you. Mm-hmm.
Especially from Mexico City, at one of the genealogy conferences, I had spent quite a bit of time with one of the women from Mexico City, an Orthodox woman.
Okay, yeah, no, thank you. So we'll look at Mexico, and maybe even as we'll see what we can bring, but Mexico City, and in fact, I know a couple of families from Mexico City that live in Cleveland now. If I don't know if anyone knows the Nurkos, who live just very close to us in Beechwood, actually, are from Mexico City and live in Beechwood today. So I'll see also with them to get any information, because they were involved in the Jewish community there as well. And today, still, Mexico still has a Jewish community about 30,000 strong, as well as many people, about 110,000, who call themselves Israelites, that believe themselves to be descendants of the Jewish community. A very strong community in Mexico that still maintains some connection to Judaism or to Jewish ancestry. So no, thank you, and definitely
Mexico and Central America. We could stay busy with this.
We could. Because I was planning for next week to come to our own country. The United States. We have touched on synagogues in the United States here and there, but haven't focused. But as it stands, the United States. There's many communities in the United States, but right here in our own country, of course, is the largest, or the second largest, perhaps. There's some debate about whether Israel has the largest Jewish population or the United States does. For many, many years and decades, it's been the United States, and some still claim the United States to have the largest Jewish community, but many researchers and population demographic experts say that in the last few years, Israel has overtaken the United States in terms of Jewish population. But nonetheless, the United States, of course, is the heart of one of the two largest Jewish communities in the world, and would love to look next week at the United States. I'll also try to prepare some information on communities in Mexico and Central and Latin America to look at Jewish communities there as well. But next week, we'll focus on Jewish communities throughout our own country, and both in Cleveland, but around the entire country, to see kind of the uniqueness of synagogues and what Jewish communities are building throughout the United States. So thank you. I want to share. I'll put back in, Lynn had a request. I know I shared at the beginning, but I'll share at the end now because not everyone was on. Lynn, if you want to share, but I just shared the message on the chat.
Yeah. Okay, you shared it. So basically, I'm the Zoom Rabbi. The Zoom Rabbi, in case you don't know, looks for people to do the blessings before and after the Torah readings and also English readings. I'm looking for people for day 1 and day 2. And my information is on the chat. And I'm in a car, so I can't do much more. So,
And
That's
it's
it.
much better to ask people in person for that.
Lots of
I
love.
can't do much in person.
Much harder to turn down that way.
Well, I can, I'll send you a picture of myself. It's as close as I can get. I'm in the wrong zip code, 34109. Too far away to walk over to your door. So that's it. Okay, thank you.
Good, of course, of course. Thanks, Helen. Yeah.
Public service announcement. For those of you who are going to be delivering the Yom HaShoah candles, they are in Rosenthal Auditorium, and probably give the temple a call before you go to pick them up, just to be sure. But they were bagged on Sunday. Paul is very appreciative to those from our group that came on Sunday morning to help.
To be honest, it was such a pleasure to see our classmates in person.
Are we-
Sure.
are
Thank you to
really
everyone who assisted.
Hey.
Great to have everyone with us next week. We'll venture closer to home in our own country and possibly to Mexico and Central American Jewish communities if we can make it there. Otherwise, that'll be in 2 weeks. But great
So
to
we
see
don't
everyone.
need our passports, or should we bring our passports?
No passport.
Okay.
You're welcome to bring your passport, but
Maybe our vaccine
may
passports.
not be
I don't know.
necessary.
The vaccine card's more important.
Your
Yeah.
vaccine card might be more important today. And good
So
luck.
we have no
Hopefully,
class
more and
next
more of
week?
us will get the vaccine. Yeah.
So there's no class next week?
No, there is. No. It's
Oh,
just
okay.
that you and I were visiting synagogues in the United States. But there
Oh,
will be
okay.
class next week and throughout the month of March. There's 3 more sessions leading us
Oh,
up
okay.
to Passover. There will be 3 more sessions.
Oh, okay.
Rabbi, when you're looking at the synagogues in the United States, could you do some that just seem like off the beaten track? Like, I don't think of Utah as a big Jewish population, but I know there are synagogues there. The same thing.
Yeah,
with
no,
the
we'll look
Dakotas
for
and
synagogues.
stuff.
If anyone wants to send me examples or share right now, I'll stay on for a minute. Any particular synagogues or communities, there's definitely a synagogue, at least one in Salt Lake City. In fact,
Nice.
I remember working with USY, the youth group of the conservative movement. The synagogue has a USY chapter, and they made a shirt that said "Utah Jew, Endangered Species," which was a very cute shirt. But there is a synagogue, at least one in Salt Lake City, that I know of offhand. But
I think
definitely,
my husband once, as a student, went to high holiday services in Ogden, Utah, of all places.
Ogden. Okay.
But there
I
are
was
definitely
actually-
Jews in Salt Lake City. There are a lot of doctors and professors
Yeah.
and researchers. There definitely are Jews in Salt Lake.
And guess what? I was born there.
Good.
And one of my sisters and one of my cousins. So I know 3
You were, yeah,
Jews that were
right.
actually born in Salt Lake City, all Jewish.
There you go.
Good. Making notes of that. Places, Lynn, sorry. Thank you. But good. So feel free to share with me and we'll see everyone next week.